today we're actually going to start a new sermon series, and the sermon series is called Reoriented, Finding More When There Is Less. And I'm really excited about this. We started to kind of assemble a preaching team. So over the next 8 weeks, including this Sunday, we're actually going to have a few other people preach also, which I'm really excited about, and just kind of bring our different giftings and the way we go approach the scriptures and kind of draw these things out. But in this series, what we felt like is that we wanted to ask the questions of why do we do Sunday mornings? Why do we gather? Why do we do worship through song and music? Why do we take communion, listen to a message, a guy talk, and sometimes good or not, I don't know. Why do we do all these things? Why do we drink coffee and hang out together? And then it kind of shifted because we realized that a lot of that landscape has changed. So what we wanted to do is actually look at why do we do those things, but then how do they actually play into the rest of our life? And in a time like this, when so many things have been stripped away from us, and we might feel like there's so much less in life, one, how can we take advantage of this time of less and find more? But also, when we feel robbed and things that we've placed value in start to be taken away, how can we still find significance? How can we still find meaning? How can we still find purpose in a time like this when the life that we knew essentially has been taken away from us? So we want to step into that, reorienting just kind of who we are, and essentially we want to orient ourselves around God. So that's going to be 7 weeks, and what we're going to do is break down an acronym of worship. So we're going to take the word worship, and each week is going to be a letter of that, W.O.R.S.H.I.P, much easier to read than just say out loud. And each of those words is actually a way in which we can open ourselves up to and experience God. So we're really excited about that, and would encourage you to continue to press in each week. And then out of the Sundays, we're actually going to have some practices for that week for all of us to engage both individually and collectively. So the word worship, even as I say that, I realize that that can be a loaded word in a lot of ways. If you've grown up in church and you've grown up just religious, a follower of Jesus, more than likely you're familiar with the word worship. And most often it's associated with song and music. The thing that we do on Sunday morning when we come together and we have a band and we have words on the screen and we sing our praises to God. And that is an act of worship. It's actually one of the things that we're commanded to do the most, or instructed to do, is actually to sing, to dance, to be joyful, to sing praises, to shout his name. It's over like 400 something times in the Bible, I believe. So that is absolutely a form of that. And then we also call things worship services or worship gatherings. And that's the Sunday morning when we collectively come together. We not only sing through song and music, worship through song and music, but we also take communion like we just did. We also open up the scriptures and we hear a message and something that's relevant to our life, and we teach and kind of chew into things of why do we have the Bible and what does it mean for our life today. And then we do community, and we have what's called a weird Christian word of fellowship. Like we come together, and we don't oftentimes know what that fully means, but essentially we come together to encourage one another. So these are things that we do, all wrapped in worship. And then there's a whole other side to worship. If we look at our culture, oftentimes worship can be something that is vain, or even conceited in a way that people want to be worshiped, or that we want to worship people or others. And it can become this thing that it almost feels like, well, why do people need to be worshiped? And then that even brings the question, we can be skeptical of, why does God need our worship? If he's so big and powerful and almighty, why does he actually need us to worship him? Doesn't that seem a little bit selfish and a little bit weird that he's just this egotistical being that needs us to say his name all the time, needs us to sing songs, needs us to raise our hands and worship him? So it can be a very loaded word, but I believe it's important to kind of ask the questions of why. Why do we worship? Why do we call Sunday mornings a worship gathering or worship service? Why do we do the things that we essentially do on Sundays as a church, as a followers of Jesus, that outside looking in can be a little odd? It's really one of the only spaces in our culture that does something like that. And it can be a little bit of a weird thing sometimes. So we want to open up these conversations. Now, we don't oftentimes ask the question why behind things unless we're forced to, until something goes wrong. I oftentimes don't ask the question of how my car runs or how it's doing until it breaks down on the side of the road. Then I ask why, and I want to get it fixed. And I think right now, as culture has, this current pandemic has pushed the church into operating in new ways, it's good to stop and pause and ask the question of why. Why do we do what we do? Because sometimes I think what can happen is we can just kind of get into it a routine, especially as Christians or followers of Jesus with our Sunday mornings. It can kind of become a check the box item that we're supposed to do it because, or we do it because we're supposed to do it. Let's ask the question why and peel back the layers on these things a little bit, and we hope to do that through this sermon series. Now, a big part of this is that I believe when we talk about worship, what we're talking about ultimately is prioritizing. What are we prioritizing in our life? You see, I think we were created to worship. We were actually created to look to something, to elevate things above others, to prioritize things in our life that we place our time, our money, our energy, our effort, that we place everything into. But it's so important to ask the question why, because oftentimes what we worship is what we prioritize, and then what we're prioritizing in our life, we're actually placing value on. And what we place value on is oftentimes what determines our value. And that's why it's so important to ask the question, why? Why do I worship? What do I worship? What am I prioritizing in my life? What am I putting value in? And how is that actually speaking to my value, to my worth? So I would ask this, the open-ended question of like, what are you prioritizing in your life right now? And I think it's a good time to ask that because a lot of what we've prioritized probably is not there anymore. At least it looks a lot different. And how we value it and the value that it gives us, very, very, very different than a month and a half ago. So this morning, I just want to invite us into that question of what are we prioritizing in our life? And we want to explore that a little bit. Now, again, when I say worship, what are we prioritizing? What are we placing value in? I think ultimately what we want to look at and kind of peel back again, that we don't just gather just to worship for the sake of worshiping. But there's a quote, someone that wrote a book called The Spiritual Disciplines Handbook. And she says the goal of the Christian life is not so much a set of behaviors as it is an orientation of the soul toward God and his kingdom. So it's not about just becoming better at things, to becoming a better person, to doing more moral and ethical things. Though I think those things are good and though I think they happen, it's not about just trying to do this self-improvement thing all the time. What it is it's actually stopping our life and orienting around something greater than ourselves, orienting ourselves around a larger story than what we know day in and day out. And what this quote is saying, what Calhoun is saying, is that this is God and his kingdom. Kingdom can be a very loaded word, but essentially what it means is this. It's God's active rule and reign. So God's activity in our lives, God's activity here and now, and then also the promise that we have to live with him in eternity. It's his overarching kingdom, his active rule and reign. And there's an invitation to orient ourselves around that. And we get to participate in that. And the way we participate in that is through worship. Now, worship is not just what we do on Sunday mornings. Worship is a lifestyle. Worship is something that we get to do day in and day out. We already do it. We worship things all day long by where we place our priorities and our values. And I think what God is doing is he's calling us to worship him in all things, to prioritize him above all else, to place all of our value there so that we can receive an ultimate value from him. And I think Peter would agree. Peter was a follower of Jesus a couple thousand years ago. He was considered one of his apprentices or a disciple. And he follows Jesus around, and then as he kind of gets to the end of his life and he knows things are going to be changing, he writes this letter. And he writes a couple of them, actually. And today we're going to be in 2 Peter, which is his second letter that's written to the churches that essentially he is caring for. So I'm going to read from 2 Peter. It's found in the New Testament, the second half of your Bible, kind of the back third of all the pages. And we're going to read from 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 3 through 11. Andre dropped the link. Feel free to follow along. I will read, and then we'll kind of break it down from there. So 2 Peter 1, 3 through 11 says this. His divine power has given us everything we need for a godly life through our knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and goodness. Through these, he has given us his very great and precious promises, so that through them you may participate in the divine nature, having escaped the corruption in the world caused by evil desires. For this very reason, make every effort to add to your faith goodness, and to goodness knowledge, and to knowledge self-control, and to self-control perseverance, and to perseverance godliness, and to godliness mutual affection, and to mutual affection love. There's a long list, but there's 7 of them there. For if you possess these qualities in increasing measure, they will keep you from being ineffective and unproductive in your knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. But whoever does not have them is nearsighted and blind, forgetting that they have been cleansed from their past sins. Sins meaning separation from God. Therefore, my brothers and sisters, make every effort to confirm your calling and election. For if you do these things, you will never stumble, and you will receive a rich welcome into the eternal kingdom, there's that word again, of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Kingdom being God's active rule and reign. So I will always remind you, Peter says, of these things, even though you know them and are firmly established in the truth you now have. I think it is right to refresh your memory as long as I live in the tent of this body, because I know that I will soon put it aside, as our Lord Jesus Christ has made clear to me. And I will make every effort to see that after my departure, you will always be able to remember these things. Now, here's the context. There's a lot of weight behind these words, because essentially what Peter says here in the last few verses is that this is his farewell speech. Think about someone laying on their deathbed. They're choosing their last words to exhort others and to share with others. And oftentimes we put weight on that. We would think that if someone's on their deathbed, their last words are probably pretty important. And he's writing these words to a scattered church, a scattered and a persecuted church. Now, we may not be a persecuted church right now, actually fearing death, but what we are is death by others. But what we are is a scattered church. We're spread out in our homes. We can't gather together. So I think there's some relation here to how Peter is actually addressing 2,000 years ago, and then also to us. And what he's saying is, while you're scattered, while you're in persecution, what are you holding on to? What is the life that you're placing value in? Day in and day out, what are you worshiping? Where are your priorities? And he's saying that I'm going to spend the last moments of my life reminding you of where to put your priorities, where to place your value. And I think it's just such a time as this that we need to hear this. So if we back up to verses 3 and 4 in the beginning, his divine power has given us everything we need for a godly life through our knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and goodness. So if we profess to be a follower of Jesus, a believer, what we're saying is we know of this knowledge, we know of his goodness, and we know that we are called to also a life of glory and goodness. Now, through these, he has given us his very great and precious promises. Our knowledge is that we know the life of Jesus. We know that he died, that he actually suffered for us, and that he raised to life to give us new life. This is the knowledge that we have to place our faith in, so that through them you may participate in the divine nature. God is actually inviting us into his nature, his goodness, his love, his beauty, his righteousness. And it's in this knowledge through Jesus that we get to participate. It's an invitation to us. And that we get to escape the corruption in this world caused by evil desires. That we get to live a life of goodness and love and beauty. I remember after college, it was my first year playing professional soccer, and the way it worked out is my college years of playing didn't end the way I dreamt of them. I actually ended up breaking my hand. I was a goalkeeper, and playing time was sporadic after that. I didn't get the accolades that I dreamed of, and having the prestigious name to then move on professionally. So after that, I had some combines and some opportunities to try out for some professional teams, and none were working out. So I kind of started to change my mindset and my workout, and wanted to start pursuing other things. And then I got a call, and it kind of came out of nowhere, but I got invited to a different tryout with another professional team. And to shorten the story, I ended up being at Real Salt Lake. It's a team in Salt Lake in the MLS. The year before, they had just beat the LA Galaxy. I know all of you know what I'm talking about because I'm talking soccer, and that's all of our favorite sports. And it should be, though. I want to make sure that's clear. Like the Galaxy is the team that David Beckham played on. So I somehow end up in this team that is considered the top team in the country at this time. And I'm there to be their third-string goalkeeper, to train behind one of the greatest goalkeepers, the American goalkeepers that we've seen. And after about a month or two, I remember the goalkeeper coach coming to me. And he would say, Ryan, I want you to start playing up to your ability. And I remember those words striking me in an encouraging way, but also a way of drawing these things out to me that I didn't really know what was going on internally. And what I realized is that I wasn't playing as best as I could. I wasn't really playing as myself. You see, I found myself in this situation that I could only dream of, and what I felt was I wasn't good enough to be there. I wasn't the big name player out of college like most of the other guys were. I hadn't had this long career to this point like the other goalkeepers had. There was things that I just didn't feel like I was worthy of being there. And what he was saying is, Ryan, you are. You have everything that you need. You just need to believe in that. And then what you need to do is you need to practice that. And I feel like this is what God has done through Jesus, that he has actually made us holy. He has made us for goodness and knowledge and love and brotherhood. He is actually, in his suffering, in his laying down of life, he is invited into this life of the kingdom, where he has said that you've been made worthy. I have given you the keys to the soccer field, and you just get to practice and get better whenever you want, but you're here, you're at the field, you're on the team. And I give you that invitation through Jesus. You do not need to earn it. And that's what I felt 3 and 4 is talking to. And then what that does is it actually unleashes this ability for us to step into these 7 attributes out of the essence of God. And his essence is love, and then we have these attributes of his divine nature that we get to participate in, to continue stepping into. But what it requires is it requires us to worship. It requires us to actually prioritize him in our life. It requires us to prioritize these attributes and long for them and practice them. Again, we're already on the field. We've been given all of these things. We only get to grow in them from here. We get to now play up to our ability. And that is what a life of worship looks like. We don't just worship on Sunday mornings. We don't just gather together to prioritize him one time a week. We actually worship every single day in all that we do. We're called to a lifestyle of worship, and what happens in that is we get to experience more goodness and beauty and love. And then what happens is it actually overflows into everything else in our life. So chapters 5 to 9, I just want to read them again. I'm just going to read the attributes here, but we add to our faith goodness, and to goodness knowledge, self-control, perseverance, and perseverance, godliness. In what other way in our life can we actually attain godliness other than it being given to us? We can't attain that. So that through me you may participate in my divine nature, having escaped the corruption in the world caused by his desires. Going back to verse 4, I just love that. And this is what it leads to. This leads to mutual affection and love. We look at these 6 other attributes, and what they lead to is the main essence of God, and that's love. And more than anything right now, as we look at our world and what's going on, you actually see all these new displays of love, and it's a beautiful thing. Now imagine with me that in our homes, in our neighborhoods, in our city, and across our world, that these acts of love, this essence for actually sacrificing on the behalf of others, no matter the outcome or the danger it might give to you. Imagine all of us participating in this love and actually stepping into this other-centeredness, this mutual affection for others. Imagine the transformation that would happen if we look at the divide in our country, if we look at the need for reconciliation across all lines, if we look at the need to actually minimize the gap between wealth, if we look at the need to help those who work so tremendously hard actually earn a livable wage. If we look at the division across, just imagine what a transforming love can do. And the invitation is to step into that and just receive it. He's actually offering it to us without needing to earn it, and we get to just grow in it day in and day out. This is what we get to prioritize, these attributes that then lead to the essence of love. Now, as we all worship something, I think it's good to actually ask what we're worshiping now. As we all prioritize things in our life, it's important to ask, because sometimes we can prioritize things that we think are doing good. The reality is that with everything that we do with prioritization is it's all interconnected. Whatever we're prioritizing trickles into the rest of our life. A couple years back, I was leading at our last church, and I hit this season of working tremendously hard and enjoying what I'm doing, and we were in a very busy season as a church. Caitlin, my wife, was a new nurse, and she was working night shifts, and over about a 6-month period, it felt like we were just living these two different lives. Now, if we look at it, we were prioritizing important things. She was prioritizing her work and career. I was prioritizing ministry and serving God and serving others, and we can just continue to look at those things and justify that we're prioritizing the right things in our life. But what we found after about 6 months is we continue to prioritize those above our marriage, as we continue to prioritize those above self-care, as we continue to prioritize those about relaxing and enjoying one another and being with family. As those things continue to happen, we hit a breaking point. And Caitlin ended up with panic attacks and anxiety for about 2 weeks, to a point of just not being able to leave the house, in bed, crying. And I remember this feeling inside of me that I was prioritizing the right thing. I could justify it all day long that what I was doing was right and it was for others. But what was happening is because I prioritized that over something else that probably should have been prioritized more, it needs to be prioritized more, that started to negatively affect the other things in my life. And I was placing all my value in something that I could give to a lot, but it has an expiration on how long it can actually give me value. And when I started to find my value in what I was doing, I hit the end of the road. And our marriage hit a breaking point. And it was us realizing that we needed to reorient our lives to where we can get back to a healthy and fruitful and good and loving marriage. And I would say that when that happened, other things started to improve. As we prioritized the right things, as we looked at what we were doing, that started to flow down into other things. And there was be more goodness and more beauty and love in everything that we were doing. So I think right now, like asking the question, is there something in your life like that? Is there something in your life that you are prioritizing that's probably a good thing to prioritize, but are you prioritizing it above other things that you should prioritize more? Are you prioritizing it above prioritizing God in your life? It's probably the biggest question. I encourage you just to sit with that and to ask, what am I prioritizing in my life right now? Write it out. Write on a sheet 10 bullet points and go through the list. If you want to know what you're prioritizing, look at where you're spending your money. Look at where you're spending your time. Look at what consumes most of your emotions and your feelings and your energy. And I think you'll find out pretty quick what you're prioritizing, what you're worshiping. The definition of love, devoting oneself. This is Peter's definition, devoting oneself to the well-being of others, no matter their response for the cost. To love is to share God's own life. If we want to share God's own life, we have to participate in God's life. If we want to share this essence of love, this goodness, this beauty, this self-perseverance, this mutual brotherhood, if we want to share all of these things, we first need to receive it. And that's God's invitation here. And I think that what I've noticed in my life, what I've realized is that where we place our value, oftentimes is what gives us value, and the only thing that can give us unlimited value that continues to grow is God. Everything else we place our value in has a limited value that it can return to us. Work, family, self-care, emotions, social status, economic well-being, everything. And as we notice that right now, those things are just futile, they're fleeting, and they're changing. And the ground we walked on and we've walked on for so long is unstable right now. And what we've prioritized, we can't prioritize anymore. And it can leave us not feeling valued, It can leave us not feeling loved, because I know for me, I can't do the same things. And oftentimes I can get my love and my value from what I can do. So what do you want? What do you want to prioritize? What do you want to put your value in so that you will receive that value? A.J. Swoboda, I'm going to wrap up with this. A.J. Swoboda is a pastor up in Portland. He came to Fresno, I think it was sometime last year. There's a couple things in his talks that stood out to me. One was he shared this story. And he said that there's a Jewish tradition that says that Moses, we go all the way back into the Old Testament, Moses was called to actually lead Israel out of the bondage and slavery they were in Egypt under Pharaoh. And the story starts with God encountering Moses. And it happened in form of burning bush. And that's a very common children's story. I think most have heard it. If you haven't, you go back to the book of Exodus. But Moses is actually walking, and this bush catches fire, and it speaks to him. And he says, Moses. And he calls Moses forward. And the Jewish tradition goes as this. One of the stories and one of the thoughts is that there was a lot of people that walked by this burning bush. There's a lot of people that walked by this call and this voice. Moses was actually just the first one to stop. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but what occurs is that this bush, God actually calls Moses to him, and he says, Moses, take off your sandals. The ground you are standing on is holy. In the trajectory of Moses' life to lead an entire nation that leads to our life today, that we can actually step into the story of as our own, started with Moses taking off his sandals, standing on holy ground and spending time with God. Whatever else was going on in his life, I'm sure there was a ton, he stopped and he worshiped. He stopped and he prioritized God's voice in his life. He stopped and he placed all of his value in that moment of taking off his sandals and hearing God's voice. AJ went on to tell a story that he said that for so many years, he has a couple kids, and for 4 or 5 years, as a kid was kind of getting older, 3 or 4 range, and could talk and understand things, every time AJ would come home from work of a long day and his kid was sitting in the living room or on the couch or wherever, he would ask his dad, he would ask AJ, he would say, Dad, are you going to take your shoes off? Dad, are you going to take your shoes off? Dad, are you going to take your shoes off? And for the longest time, AJ would say, yeah, I'm going to take my shoes off, I'm home. And he got to a point, he finally realized, like, why does he always ask me to take my shoes off? So he asked him, he said, son, why do you ask me this? I'm going to take my shoes off. And his son said, because when you take your shoes off, I know that you're not leaving again. When you take your shoes off, I know that you're going to be present to me, essentially is what he's saying. And I think this is God's invitation to all of us. That in our worship, daily, day in and day out, hour in and hour out, in all that we're doing, can we find ways to take our shoes off? Can we find ways to stay in his presence, to hear his voice, to give us meaning and value and purpose to our life? And this is what I want to declare over Midtown. That we be a people that take our shoes off. That we be a people that throughout our day, we worship him. We prioritize him in our life, no matter what's going on. We place our value there, because I know that the only thing that happens when we do that is we actually are given our value. We are told that we are loved. We are told that we are forgiven. We are told that we are cared for, that we are not alone, that he is with us. We are given our value and our purpose when we actually stop and we listen and we ask. And I know that for me, I cannot ask for any more in my life. And the times that I don't do that, life sucks. Life is harder than it probably needs to be. And it's times like this that I need to go back to that more and more and more. So for me, some things that work, there's something called a Sabbath, and it's been tradition for thousands of years. But the Sabbath is the idea that we actually stop. And as God rested on the seventh day, that we are called to rest, that we don't work 7 days a week. What happens is Sabbath is an act of worship, because we're saying, you know what, God, we're going to actually stop everything else in our life, and we're going to now worship you. We're going to prioritize you. We're going to place all of our value in you. What happens in that moment is it reminds me that I don't have to work to earn love. I don't have to do to earn value. But I can just simply be, and I can hear his voice. As I read earlier, just be still. In Psalm 24, be still, and for they know that I am God. A breath prayer. This is something that as we breathe in and we breathe out, we breathe in a word of hope, of joy, of peace, whatever it is, of love. We breathe that out, and it centers us. It reorients us. It actually orients us around God's truth for us It's a way to calm us in the day and remind us who he is and who he is in our life and who we are because of that. The daily examine, the one thing that I keep on my wall, I know we passed these out at church when we were, I think it was our second or third week, but can we stop and take inventory on our day? God, what were you doing on our day? What can you highlight that I can grow in and continue to center around you? I mean, the list goes on and on and on. There's hundreds of these. There's not just a few just to practice, but these are things that we can incorporate into our life. And it's not another thing to add to a religious task that we do, but it's something that we get to do, to go back to that invitation that he gives us through Jesus to participate in his kingdom, to participate in his life and the best life that he has for us, that when everything else is falling down around us, we can still find meaning and value and purpose. And that is why we worship. And then what happens is when we're filled up with that, we cannot help but to go and do that for others. We cannot help but go in love. We cannot help but become spirit-dependent and other-centered, and that is transformation. Our vision of Midtown is to be transforming lives, transforming everything, and it's we step into transformation so that everything else transforms around us. And it becomes more and more effortless the more we step into his presence, and those are spiritual practices, and that is why we're breaking down this acronym of worship over the next 7 weeks. Each letter of the word represents a way that we can open ourselves up to God. And weekly that we're going to actually engage. So I think Monday at 12 o'clock, or we might find a different time, but starting in 2 weeks, 2 Mondays from now, we'll jump on a call, and whoever preached that Sunday will have a spiritual practice for us to try on that week. And again, there's a ton of them, and not everyone resonates with every person, but I encourage all of us to try each week. We're going to jump on a call, teach on it a little bit, interact what we can do. But in a time such as this, I pray that we can reorient our lives. We can take inventory and realize that we've been invited to orient ourselves around a larger story that gives us value and purpose.